On this edition of Independent Sources, Cop Watch, how a community activist tries to keep the New York City Police Department accountable.
The Fixers Out, why more Hasidic Jews may begin running for political office.
And the face of things, a French artist invites New Yorkers to make a bold statement in Times Square.
Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Viano Ravinka.
And I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre. Who watches the watchman? It's a loose translation of a phrase attributed to the Roman poet Juvenal, meaning who will guard those charged with guarding others. Over the years, it's become more of a phrase associated with keeping those in power in check.
That's what Dennis Flores has been trying to do since 2002. The Puerto Rican activist has been using his camera to document police brutality, sometimes at his own risk. Now he's using the lessons learned over the years to teach others how to best ensure their safety while doing the same.
Flores is the first to admit that it's not the easiest task. He learned that early on in his career. Here's my conversation with Dennis Flores, the creator of Cop Watch. Dennis, how did you get into this business of Cop Watch, where you go around videotaping what the police are doing in the streets?
Back in the mid-90s, I was part of a street organization that got politicized by a group of former Young Lords members, and I got involved in police brutality
Young Lords
movement.
were the Puerto Rican...
sort of like Black Panthers.
Okay.
And, you know, back in the mid-90s, they got us involved in police brutality movement and, you know, organizing around families whose children were murdered by police. And through these protests and having a lot of interactions with cops, I got into photography and video documenting, and I started like documenting these rallies and kind of helping to do security at these protests. And that's how I started documenting how cops interacted with protesters.
And over the years, what have you seen? Now we hear so much about stop and frisk, and you've been at the forefront of this for quite some time. What have you seen that is shocking to you?
I think for one is that police are intimidated by cameras. It kind of like takes power away from the police, where if you do it in a disciplined manner, where you have multiple cameras around, you know, cops, if you try to record the police or with your cell phone and you're right there up front, cops will immediately grab the camera, threaten you, tell you that's illegal. But when you do this with a group of people that are disciplined and not there to provoke the police, but in a sense to just merely observe, which is legal, you form a chain of cameras all around you, so people at certain distances. And if the cops kind of like tend to do their work, but they do go by the book. So in a sense, it prevents police, you know what I'm saying, misconduct. And they tend to be more respectful when there's that many eyes around them.
Now, have you ever gotten injured by the police while you were doing this work?
I definitely have. Back in October 2002, I had witnessed some police manhandling a young man who was already subdued, who was in handcuffs and was crying in a train station in front of the token booth. So I, at what I thought was a safe distance, I grabbed the payphone and I just photographed from there. The token booth clerk was watching, and I dialed 911 while I was photographing the police. So I stood on the phone talking to an operator, explaining what was going on, describing the police, you know, giving them descriptions of the train station I was at. And while I was on the phone, the police walked up to me and started macing me on the phone. Luckily, I put the camera in my face and kept shooting, and it blocked the mace from actually entering my eyes. So they emptied 2 cans of mace on me, and when they saw that I was still, you know, I was still able to see them, and I wasn't budging, and I stood on the phone explaining detail what was going on to the operator, they stepped back, and about 15 cops answered the call, came and surrounded me around the payphone, and told me that everything was gonna be okay, that they understood that I was the one who called the police, that they need to place me under arrest. And the operator was just telling me the same thing over the phone. Do not resist. They have to take you to the precinct. They're going to have to handcuff you.
Why? Why did they have to?
Because the cops then made a complaint, and they said that there was a cop under distress. Okay. They said that, you know, they called in a 1013, which means that an officer is down. So they think, you know, that call, all the other cops on beat, they take that as a cop got shot, cop got assaulted, you know. So not once did I put my hands on them. The token booth clerk who was there witnessed the whole thing. And these cops told me, turn around and let us place you under arrest. And I took the chance by calling 911 because I knew those calls get recorded as well. Mm-hmm. So I kind of like wanted to cover my grounds and make sure that there's many eyes, that there's recording more than what I just had with this camera. So I left the phone hanging, and I turned around, and I had to give the camera to the cop. I did exactly what the operator told me to do. Turned around, they put me in handcuffs, and they passed the camera to one of the cops who had just maced me and was smacking this kid around. And he just slammed it on the floor, and they started breaking it. And all these cops grabbed me, you know, from every single arm and leg and threw me on the floor. They piled on top of me, and a police officer cracked my head open with a walkie-talkie.
Oh, wow, pretty dramatic. I mean, over the years, what changes have you seen in policing because of your work?
I think it's spreading like wildfire, and I'm not going to necessarily say it's because of me, but I think the masses are getting hip to, you know, the power that we have now with social media and cell phones and being able to instantly upload footage onto YouTube. And I think examples of that is what we saw with the Arab Spring and how they were able to mobilize, and, you know, with Occupy Wall Street, and how images that once were captured on cell phone, on video cameras, you know, you could have easily gotten arrested and assaulted and the cameras disappeared. But now we're seeing much more people just, you know, filming stuff and instantly putting on YouTube, it going viral, and people all over the world get to see this. I think that's what's changing, and that's what has actually become a threat.
But also, you've been involved in training other people on how to do this properly, and there's a right way, there's a wrong way of doing this. So talk to us a little bit about that.
I think that we need to take precautions about, you know, sometimes our ego, or, you know, kind of like we might think that, you know, we're revolutionaries and we're fighting the system, and that could kind of like get you a little, you know, confrontational with cops, when that's not necessarily you know, how you should go about it. It's more important to observe, to document, to keep yourself safe and other people that you're with safe. People can get hurt and possibly killed. So the best thing to do is do it in a disciplined manner where you're not there. The objective is not to provoke. You know,
and the objective is really to record what's going on, so people will be informed of the way the police act.
Yeah, and it's within our right to document, to videotape, even in the subway system, in the street, even at a police precinct. There are laws to protect us to do this, and, you know, we have to, in a sense, you know, attest to that, take a stand, and possibly even take a chance and risk yourself when that's actually absolutely necessary.
You've sued the NYPD and won some settlements. Talk to us about how you go about suing the NYPD.
I guess one thing is first is learning about your rights. You know, people tend to believe, and a cop will tell you it's illegal to record. They'll threaten you, and it's smart to never shut the camera off. If a cop is telling you to shut the camera off, there's a reason why he's trying to do that, or she's trying to do that, because you're in a sense taking power away from them. So I think it's about learning about your rights, learning that, and a lot of people in our communities believe that, you know, why complain to the system? Why go to the courts? We're not going to get justice. We do have a right to fight, and God willingly, you're able to document things, and you're able to collect enough evidence that you can take this to court. You can't fight. It's a lot harder.
On what ground did you sue them and won? I'm intrigued by that.
One, I was arrested for videotaping police, which is illegal for a cop to arrest you. You are within your right to film, to photograph, and, you know, so I was maliciously prosecuted, false arrest. My First Amendment right to videotape police was violated by being arrested for it. So, you know, there are laws to protect us from doing so. And, you know, what happens with most cases is that the city will not allow this case to go before a judge, so they're going to offer you money to settle.
Too many details will come out.
Exactly, exactly. And then you get to see the process of how they police themselves.
Sure.
You know, they're independent, so-called independent bodies who investigate police misconduct.
The NYPD's demographic has changed. It's a really, really diverse force now, more diverse than a lot of other forces around the country, if not the world. Has that made a difference? I mean, you have a lot of Latino, African-American, Asian cops and Arabs even. Has that helped with the culture?
I believe that, once good intended people join the police force, they either like leave right away or they become just like the ones that they join. They can become just as aggressive. So there are many cases right now, like Schoolcraft. This one police officer who was with a hidden recorder recorded conversations from the commanding officers and precincts, ordering them to make false arrests, knowing them that they're arresting people just to fill quotas, just to make the numbers go up, to make it appear as crime is going down. But what a lot of these police officers that have come forward with this information, they get persecuted, they get targeted. We see cops, being arrested and detained and sent to hospitals, like Schoolcraft, or look at the cases like Serpico, who was targeted by the police department. So whistleblowers don't necessarily get any real protection by the police department. Like I said, this is systemic. This is something that it's a plague, it's a disease within the police department. So instead of properly prosecuting them and investigating, it's, like I said, it's a cleanup crew. Let's sweep it under the rug like it doesn't exist and pay people out so there isn't real justice.
Well, unfortunately, here we have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Flores.
Thank you very much for having me.
Still to come on the show, why more Hasidic Jews may soon be running for office.
Before that, Zyphus Lebron has some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic and community media. From Carib News, West Indian youth in Flatbush are turning to gangs to fill a void at home. Leroy Hutchinson, a former Brooklyn police officer of 12 years, is working to try to bring East Flatbush residents and the NYPD together to address this trend. He told Carib News that many first and second generation children born in the U.S. to West Indian parents are searching for love in the wrong places. This while their parents work long hours to provide for their families. St. Vincent psychologist Dr. Burt John, who has studied Caribbean immigrant families, says there's a disconnect between the generations, which has led to many young people heading to gangs. Phil Am reports that Ed Santos, the first Filipino to run for the New York City Council, might spark the Filipino community's interest in local politics. Phil Am spoke to the Philippine Consulate General, Teresa Dizon de Vega, about the community's lack of engagement in New York politics. Vega explained that within the Asian community in New York, the Pew Research Center finds that Filipinos are the least politically engaged. But this might change with Ed Santos's bid for city council. The 27-year-old Democrat hopes to represent District 8, which is made up of East Harlem and the South Bronx. The Brooklyn Inc. reports that Pakistani residents in the Little Pakistan section of Brooklyn are gearing up for their country's upcoming elections. According to the 2010 census, Flatbush, Brooklyn is home to over 20% of the 40,000 plus Pakistani Americans in New York City. Pakistan will elect a new parliament on May 11th. The country's constitution gives its citizens living abroad the right to vote in national elections. The election will mark the first time in the country's history that a democratically elected government completed its term. The Russian Bazaar recently published an op-ed piece about the dwindling number of Russian immigrants allowed into the United States. Based on data published by the Department of Homeland Security and data from nonprofit organizations, Russian-speaking immigrants will account for less than 1% of U.S. passports and green card holders within the next 5 to 6 years. The author of the story, Eugene Novitsky, gave several reasons he thinks immigration is dwindling. These include limited visa availability and immigration fraud in Russia. And finally, from Voices of New York, a new Nepalese movie is not only entertaining, it's becoming a source of funding for a charitable cause. The film, titled Visa Girl, is a comedy about 3 men from Kathmandu who are obsessed with getting a visa to the U.S. They later meet a Nepalese-born American female resident who they begin to pursue in order to secure a green card. Visa Girl premiered recently at a crowded showing at the NYU Cantor Film Center. The proceeds from the film will be given to Empower One, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping street children in Nepal. Those were just a few stories from the ethnic and community media. Independent sources will be back right after this.
You realize that 49 million Americans struggle with hunger? That's 1 out of every 6 Americans.
These people are around us every day. They're our friends, they're our coworkers, their kids go to school with our kids.
Sometimes we're not even aware that they're struggling. This problem is closer than you think. But so is the solution.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
There may soon be more Hasidic Jews vying for political offices in New York. The group has traditionally stayed away from public office because of religious reasons and, in some cases, fear of anti-Semitic backlash.
That's changing these days with the decline of fixers. These are usually middlemen from the ultra-Orthodox Hasidic community who act as negotiators between the Hasidim and elected officials and candidates.
I spoke with Jewish Forward reporter Josh Nathan-Kazis about why these fixers are in decline and how some Hasids are already taking political power. Josh, before we discuss whether or not Hasidic fixers may be a dying breed, as you call them, explain to our audience what fixers are and their role on the New York political scene.
Sure. So the ultra-Orthodox Jewish Hasidic community is large and growing throughout New York State, sort of concentrated in Brooklyn and also sort of upstate parts of Rockland and Orange counties. These communities are by their nature very insular. English is not the first language in many of these communities. So often they need someone to mediate between the community and politicians. So there are these individuals who sort of serve as these bridges. And they're members of the Hasidic communities, but they're not necessarily leading members within the community. So the example that was given to me by one of the people I quoted in my piece was that there's apparently sort of a row in a Hasidic shul, in a Hasidic synagogue. That's the row where the most important members of the community sit. And this guy was saying that sort of the fixers, the political guys, are never the people who sit in that in that row. Rather, they're kind of just sort of general community members who, by virtue of building relationships between the important people in their community and the politicians, become significant themselves.
And how do they operate?
Hasidic communities have a lot of political heft in that they are able to deliver these block votes, which can be very important in parts of Brooklyn, particularly in local elections. And the people who control those block votes are the communal leaders. So they're, heads of the schools or the head rabbis. The Hasidic communities are formed in a sort of very top-down way. There's one Rebbe, who's sort of the spiritual leader of a whole sect. And there will be other leaders sort of at his level and beneath him. And it's those people who are able to sort of suggest which way the community's vote should go. So there are then these sort of intermediaries who will talk on the one hand to the politicians and on the other hand to the people who wield the real power over the votes and sort of negotiate which way the vote will go. And these communities are often very poor and have lots of social service needs, needs for housing, certain kinds of welfare, certain kinds of school subsidy. So there's this potential horse trading that can happen, and that's really the job of these fixers.
The Hasidic community is split into different sects. Do you see fixers from each sect?
That, in my understanding, is the way it works, that a specific sect or a specific area. I don't know, for instance, in the town of Muncie, there are a lot of different Hasidic communities living together, and I don't know whether there's sort of one fixer for the area or a lot of guys who, each of whom represents their own sect, but certainly, the sects are different and have rivalries with each other and even within themselves. So it's a very complicated scene. I mean, it's not as though there's sort of one guy who can say, like, I think it becomes a very complicated political matrix.
Explain why there has been this long-standing opposition to the Hasidic Hasidic leaders showing open political involvement.
Right, and I think it even goes beyond just the Hasidic community. That throughout sort of Orthodox and traditional Judaism, I think there is an anxiety about being very involved in sort of a very, very public. One of the people I spoke with suggested that it goes back to a story in the Megillah, which is a Jewish book that's read on Purim, which is a holiday that celebrates a particular victory over a particular effort to exterminate the Jews at a particular historical moment. At the end of the story, the hero of the book goes and becomes the sort of grand vizier of the king. And there's an interpretation of one little piece of wording at the end of this book that suggests that members of the community at the time were upset at this hero for joining allying himself with the king and becoming public. I mean, I think more practically, the concern is that members of the Hasidic community see themselves as being in exile, sort of an existential and also political state, and they see themselves as being particularly vulnerable in the way that a diaspora community can be. So they're worried that if someone who is very visibly a member of their community does something in the political sphere that other people don't like, it puts the whole community at risk.
Now, it may be, as you're saying in your article, that these attitudes towards open political involvement may be fading away. Why are we seeing more Hasidic political involvement nowadays?
I think there's a new generation of Hasidic activists, younger people, still mostly guys, young men who don't share an older generation's particular anxiety about being active in politics. I think that we've begun to see this in places, particularly in Rockland County. It sort of moved up a little bit from very local political offices to the county legislature at this point. 5 or 10 years ago, the school board in the part of Rockland County that includes New Square, which is a Hasidic village, had some Hasidic people on it, but was not majority Hasidic. And it was explained to me that there was sort of some fear that it would cause resentment in the community. And around 3 or 4 years ago, that changed. And now the Hasidic community controls the majority of the school board there, and that has caused resentment. And yet some people have gone on from being members of that school board. There's one now who's sitting on the county legislature, the first time that a Hasidic person has actually been on the county legislature. There's another Hasidic person who says he's going to run for the mayor of Spring Valley. He's currently on the town council. So I think we're beginning to see more of this, more of these Hasidic individuals who, instead of working through fixers, now actually running themselves.
And what's been the response within the Hasidic community to these people running for office right now?
I mean, it's interesting. I think on the one hand, I'm not aware of specific criticism of them running, as Hasidic people. I don't think that there is a particularly vocal group who are saying it's not even appropriate for you to be running. That said, I don't think they automatically get support because they're Hasidic. I think that the same sorts of horse trading that happens between Hasidic and non-Hasidic candidates in relationships with the fixers also happen in terms of the Hasidic races. I don't think just by virtue of being members of the community they don't get the community support necessarily.
In what communities do you see the change? You mentioned Rockland County. What other communities?
Parts of Rockland. I mean, in terms of Brooklyn, there are very concentrated Hasidic communities in Borough Park and in Williamsburg. There's a state senator named Simcha Felder who represents Borough Park, who is ultra-Orthodox but not Hasidic. There are some Hasidic people who pointed out to me that when he was a child, he went to a Hasidic yeshiva, so they consider him like sort of Hasidic. I think part of this is the sort of breakdown between, there used to be a very fine line, or a very strong distinction between Hasidic and non-Hasidic ultra-Orthodox people, and that in the Orthodox community is changing. But beyond that, I think that, there were a number of people who said to me that it's only a matter of time and sort of seats opening up before Borough Park has a Hasidic representative.
Josh, Nathan-Kazis, thank you for being in studio with us today.
Thanks.
When we come back, a project forged in the fires of a French riot comes to New York City.
And finally, Times Square has been bristling with even more than its usual energy these past few days. That's in part due to the French artist JR and his Inside Out project.
We hear more in this report produced by Sarah Pizon.
I'm standing in the middle of Times Square, where hundreds of faces are being glued to the ground each day. Funny faces, smiles, kisses are just among the few things you'll see here. It's part of Inside Out by JR. JR is a French artist. His name, dark sunglasses, and fedora are an attempt to remain semi-anonymous, to keep the attention and focus on these photographs and not him. They are part of a reversal art project meant to take the creative process out of his hands and put it into his audiences.
Some people would do it just to show community in a place. Some others would put it in their room because they say this is a piece of art. But a lot of the time it's a way to say I'm here, I exist.
This truck is a big part of spreading that message. It's been transformed into a rolling photo studio equipped to print massive posters of various visages.
I love it. People are so excited. You get to see all the funny faces. Everyone's so creative, and it's a nice chance. It's like bringing the city together.
Passers-by wait in line for hours to get the chance to have their picture taken and then pasted in the middle of Times Square.
It sounds pretty cool. I guess to have my face on the floor of Times Square, like pretty much, I guess it's a like one in a lifetime opportunity.
Oh, it's just a memory, you know. I mean, it's like Hollywood. You know, it's something that we've never done before.
It certainly was different when JR started the project 2 years ago in Paris. Back then, he posted a blow-up picture of suburban youth on a wall during the French riots, which called for more attention to poor immigrant communities.
After the riots in Paris, I realized that the media were portraying the suburbs in a really, tough way, and I wanted to shut back at that and ask the people to play their own caricature, how we'd see them on TV. And I started doing that in the Middle East between Israeli and Palestinian. That's when I covered the wall in 2006. And then I started doing it in Brazil. And then I realized that people were really using those photos to pass their own message.
Messages such as the empowerment of women in Africa and brokering peace between warring countries. Here in New York, it's a way to show the diversity of the city.
If you look at the photos on the ground here, you'll see the face of New York, basically.
There have been over 3,000 faces photographed in Times Square. They're all part of the world's largest participatory art project.
As we're talking right now, it's happening in thousands of cities around the world. This is just one action out of maybe 10,000.
Moi, quand t'as dit Inside Out, j'ai pensé, OK, on prend le truc qui est à l'intérieur, inside, et on le fout dehors.
The documentary about JR's global Inside Out project premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and is due out on HBO on May 20th. For Independent Sources, I'm Sarah Pizon.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Till next time, be independent-minded.